to see everyone this morning and to welcome our speaker, Professor Eric Klopfer from MIT. Eric is not a stranger to the Wilson Forum. He spoke to us a few years ago about the activities in his program regarding education. But that was before November 2022, when life changed on this planet with the introduction of ChatGPT and artificial general intelligence and all sorts of things that are changing in our world today. Today, Eric is going to speak about an initiative at MIT called Responsible AI for Social Empowerment and Education. This will cover a pretty broad spectrum. So, Eric, we're delighted to have you with us. There's no question, and this is an important part of our future on this planet. We're looking forward to hearing your comments. So, welcome back to the Wilson Forum, Eric.
Thanks so much, Ron. Let me see if I can. I want to make sure I can see everybody here as well. All right, now I can see you guys and you can see me.
Okay.
Great, thank you. And you can see my screen, yes?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Ron. Thanks, Ron, for that introduction. I should also say, Ron plays a special role in my life. I was hired at MIT now more than 25 years ago, and Ron was an instrumental part in that process and helping to sustain and create the program that I run, and hiring me and mentoring me in my early years there before he retired for the first time. And so I thank him for that support and getting me started. And when I came, actually, I was like, MIT is a weird place to do education. I'll probably stay here for a few years and then move on to someplace else. And that still hasn't happened yet for me. I'm still at MIT many years later. So thanks to Ron for that.
Yeah.
So today I'm here to talk about our Responsible AI for Social Empowerment and Education project. It's a project at MIT that's, these are the people that you'll see on the screen here that helped me prepare this presentation, but the co-PIs, I'm one of the co-PIs on this project. Ray's Cynthia Brazil, who's in the Media Lab, and Hal Abelson, who's in Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, is the other co-PI in this project. So it sort of spans many different parts of MIT, and our goal is to sort of make this sort of the sort of mainstay of K-12 education within the AI space, as well as we do work like at community colleges and things outside of MIT as well. So our reach is quite comprehensive. So I don't think I need to tell you all this, that AI is transforming personal, civic, and professional life starting in childhood. It's really something that's all over the place at this point. And that's part of our motivation, how much AI has permeated life so quickly in so many different ways, and helping us think about how we can help kids and teachers get a handle on this. So our goals are to advance learning and education and empowerment through AI by rethinking and innovating how to holistically and equitably prepare diverse K-12 students and an inclusive workforce. So I think, I highlighted a few words there. I think holistically, we think about this not as something that just gets injected in one place. Everybody just needs to get their sort of like little dose of AI, but something that's much more comprehensive. And we really do think about this is something that we think that all kids everywhere needs to know. This is not just sort of the students who are going to go on to be scientists and engineers that in sort of some way that they've pre-identified, but something that we think that is for everybody. And many of those people maybe will go on to be scientists and engineers who hadn't previously thought that they could. And we want everybody to be happy, engaged, and successful in an increasingly AI-powered society. So this is obviously something that everybody needs to know, regardless of what they're doing. When you're on social media or reading the news, like understanding the way that AI works is really important. Ultimately, we want to prepare students to be responsible and creative in the era of AI, and that's really important. I'll get back to it in a second, but this idea of creativity is really important as we think about the things that AI is doing in the world. We really think that humans play an important role in the sort of the creative inputs into these systems, and that's what we really want to be able to rely on people to do. Part of this being co-creators and responsible citizens. So this is some of our framework here. It's about demystifying AI. It's about AI and digital citizenship. It's about self-efficacy and empowerment. So helping people think that they can do things with AI and create things with AI and understand things with AI and not just sort of use AI to cheat, as we sort of see many of the headlines today. We use a couple different frameworks. This is one that we do use pretty heavily. This is the UNESCO framework. So this is an international framework in AI. And there's this idea that there's these different aspects, human-centered mindset, thinking about the ethics of AI techniques and applications, and AI system design. And there's different sort of methods that we sort of think within this, whether it's just understanding it, applying it, or creating it. And this is a really nice framework that a lot of people are using today to think about the way we think about AI education. Um, I'll get into some of the details of some of our stuff, but these are some of the principles and some of the kinds of activities that we do within the space. One of the things we really want to do is we call it computational action. This is Hal Abelson's phrase. And the idea behind computational action is that we want to empower kids to do things with computing. So in this case, it's about doing things with computing to create things, share things with their community, make a difference in their community. It's about sort of creating sort of social action within their communities through computing. And we do that through a set of AI and programming toolkits, some of which we develop at MIT, like App Inventor. We use a fork of Scratch, which is my colleague Mitch Resnick's platform. And then we draw in a lot of commercial platforms like Gemini and things like that. I just wanted to give you an idea. I'm not going to run this project live. This runs on the Raise Playground, this project here, which is, if any of you have seen the Scratch programming language, it's one of these blocks-based programming language where kids use these sort of puzzle pieces to assemble computer programs in ways that sort of help them specify what they're doing so that they don't need to remember all the syntax and the way it fits together, but they can still do really powerful things. This is one that uses a camera, and the idea is that it's supposed to identify pictures of cats and dogs. And you'll see a blue dog on the screen here over me, wearing pretty much the same shirt I am with the same background I am right now. Wasn't taken today. This is the way I am on sabbatical. What I do is I've trained this to sort of identify pictures of cats and dogs. And you'll see it identifies a picture of a dog on the screen here. Behind the scenes, what you do is you train this using something called teachable machine, where you give it a series of pictures and you tell it this is a dog, this is a cat, and then you can input that into the computer program. In this case here, if you look closely, I've trained it on pictures of orange dogs, which you'll see in the top row there, and I've trained it on pictures of black and white cats. And so sure enough, if you show it a picture of an orange cat, it will tell you that it's a dog because I've only trained it on pictures of orange dogs. And if you show it a picture of a black and white dog, it will say it's a cat because it's only been trained on pictures of black and white cats. And the idea here in this example is just to simply show kids like, hey, first of all, it's really easy and powerful to train these kinds of models, but also it's garbage in and garbage out. You know, if you train it on things that you haven't really thought about your data set very well, it's not going to be a very useful example. And that sort of leads to all sorts of great conversations around bias and these kinds of systems and the underlying models and training that we have behind them. So that's just a kind of example of the kind of stuff that we do. AI is poised to change education. We see this in several different ways. The big space that people are excited about now, which I'm a little bit less excited about, is large language model tutors. So if any of you have heard of, many people refer to as the 2 sigma problem. So there's this longstanding research where if you give a kid a tutor, a live human tutor, you can make a 2 standard deviation difference in the outcomes of that student and their performance in school. And people say, well, great. You know, the problem with that is that we have never been able to scale that. You can't have 1 human being per 1 human being in school. That's too expensive. And now we're going to give people large language model tutors, and we're going to have all these students making this 2 sigma, this 2 standard deviation difference. But in fact, large language model tutors are not human tutors. They are very different things. I think they do have an important place in school and in learning, and they can be an important part of the ecosystem that we think about, but they're not the same thing as humans. Many of you may have used AI apps, you know, it gives you feedback on different things, and that is completely different, has a completely different meaning than if a human being gives you that feedback. So if a friend, a peer tells you, you know, gives you some feedback on the way you're doing something, or you know, you take that very seriously. When the AI sort of gives you that same feedback, it doesn't mean the same thing. And that I think that difference that we see with human tutors and students has a lot to do with those relationships, which we don't see with AI. So really important to think about the role that these things play. These are not panaceas, these are not silver bullets, but they can be part of a larger scale solution. A lot of what we think about, though, is Gen AI tools and courses that support educators, ways that educators can use these kinds of tools in their own professional practices. I'll talk a little bit about this later. And we do think about policy guidance, and I'll talk about some of that as well, the way we think about both state, local, and federal governments making an impact in this space. These are three of the big activities that we do within Raise. I'm only going to talk about the first one, Day of AI, but we have lots of different other programs within Raise. RICA is a big one that we have that's about developing curriculum for elementary through high school that's focused on computing classes. So how do we integrate AI and design thinking into computing classes? MIT Future Makers is an online 6-week summer program for middle school and high school and early undergraduates that teaches them about AI and entrepreneurship, which is a really great course. We draw in industry mentors to help with students working in teams on projects. I'll talk about Day of AI, which is I guess our longest standing project at this point. Day of AI is now its own independent nonprofit. So we did spin it out of MIT about a year ago. You can find it at dayofai.org. It's about to run, I think, next week is this year's Day of AI. The idea is for Day of AI is that it's for all K-12 teachers. It's and this is now around the world. I'll show you a map later. You'll see the countries where this is a map showing, in the United States and Canada, it's quite a lot. In China, in India, in Australia, in Brazil, those are big countries where we've done a lot of work over time. Uh, with the US in mind. So they have a lot of cultural context. We think about, all these kinds of activities involve some sort of cultural context. So they involve when a country decides they're going to adopt this, they not only translate it into their language, but they try to adopt and adapt the cultural context of the activities as well. So the activities will be based on the same kind of AI principles that we have in each of our lessons, but they adapt the language and the cultural context in these different places. And so each year we've added on a new set of countries into the process. And at this point, some of you heard early on us, Ron and I, talking about influx of interest in AI education. We have so much interest at this point from countries around the world wanting to do this activity. At this point, most of it happens through our nonprofit that we started, but MIT is still involved quite a bit in it. By the end of 2025, based on our projections, as I said, we were only about $750,000. We'll more than double that this year. So we have this year the Philippines, Australia, Chile, India, Vietnam have come on as partners, and we have new engagements in Uzbekistan, Mongolia. That's the Math Olympiad in Southeast Asia is the last one. So that's several countries there. All right, let me talk a little bit about the policy implications of AI. So this is, I'll give a little context for this. we wrote a paper about the AI implications of AI in education. We wrote it probably in the fall of last year, maybe or late summer, early fall of last year. And in that paper, we wrote about the role of the Department of Education. We wrote about the NIST, and its role in the federal government. And as you all may know, those agencies within the federal government play a much smaller role than they used to. So a lot of the sort of guidance that we had created at the time for how the federal government might play a role in AI education, the landscape has changed pretty dramatically over the last 6 months. And so what I'll talk about here is some of the principles that we've distilled, and then sort of I think about the places where we're thinking about this now, where this might happen. And a couple weeks ago, we presented this to some congressional staff to try to help get them excited about doing things around AI education at the national level. All right, so what is the impact of AI-assisted learning on student outcomes and disposition? So this is a big one. I talked about this, that everybody's really excited about the idea of a professor in every pocket, the idea that we'll replace teachers or supplement teachers with lots of AI tutors and students will learn from this. And there's a couple places that have really gone all in on this kind of thing. And there's a few fundamental things we have to ask, like, does this actually improve learning? And what does learning mean? And does the definition of learning change now that we have AI? What do students need to know? What do students need to do? How has that changed now that we have AI, available to us all the time? I'll read this to you. It's a little hard to see here on this screen here. This is my colleague Justin Reich at the beginning of this past year. He runs the Teaching Systems Lab at MIT. And he had this whole poster that was sort of made for teachers about helping them think about the ways they could use AI. And part of this is about how AI is not going to replace teachers, but that teachers can really use it to their advantage. And in my Twitter feed, where I got that notification of Justin's post, I saw that advertisement for this real app that says one app that replaces teachers, tutors, and textbooks. And this is not a positive step in my opinion. I really think that school and learning is so much about a social relationship, a social context. And we learn from our peers, we learn from our teachers, we develop those relationships, we understand how to work with other people. And the idea that we should be replacing teachers and tutors with apps, I think, is fundamentally wrong. And so we really need to think about the ways that we use this kind of stuff in schools. I'll give an example. I teach a class on teaching computer science. So this is a class for MIT students to help them think about how we teach computer science at the K-12 level, mostly middle school and high school. And towards the end of the year, I did an experiment in the class. It was just getting them to think about the roles that AI plays. And I divided the class up into 3 groups. And I gave them a programming challenge. And that programming challenge, some of you, it sounds like, may know this, was in the language Fortran. Fortran was a very common language in the sciences and engineering, up until the 90s when I learned it. And quite popular before that. It is no longer used pretty much anywhere at this point. So I gave the students a challenge in Fortran, thinking that most of the students would not know it, which they did not. And said, okay, here's a programming challenge. One group is allowed to use ChatGPT to help them solve that problem. Another one used something called Code Llama, which is an open source, not quite as good large language model for coding. And the other one could use Google search, but not actually any AI as part of that process. And I told them, you have 2 steps. One is to solve this particular problem. I'm going to grade you on that, and then you're going to have a chance to study, and then I'm going to give you a closed book problem. So it's going to be very similar to the one that you had initially, but it's going to be closed book. You're not going to be able to use that tool to help solve the problem. You're just going to be able to use what you learned in the first problem to solve the second problem. And pretty quickly, the first group, the ChatGPT group, solved that first problem very quickly. The group that had the sort of lesser good large language model, it took them a little while to solve the problem, but they solved it fairly quickly as well. And the group that could only use Google search took the longest to solve that first problem. There was no simple answer. I tried to find something that's not easily Googleable. So they tried to look for the answer. They couldn't find it. So they had to break the problem down into parts, solve each part of the problem, and then ultimately they did solve the problem. Then they studied, and then I gave them the test. And none of the people in the ChatGPT group were able to get the question correct. Half the people in the group with the lesser large language model were able to get it correct, and all the people in the Google group got it correct. And the lesson here, this is not a scientific experiment, this is a classroom activity. But the lesson here is that, like, the sense that like we should reduce the struggle for students in schools, that if learning is less difficult, it will be better is totally wrong. Actually, struggling with learning is actually a really important thing. We do talk about this thing called the zone of proximal development in education. The idea that there's a sweet spot in sort of learning where learning is challenging enough where you feel like you're at the edge of your expertise, not so difficult that like you're stumped, you don't know what to do, but that you are sort of at that edge of your expertise, and that's really where we want to keep people. And if you're just sort of typing the answer into ChatGPT, you're not in that zone. You're not struggling. You're not sort of like pushing the boundaries of what you can do, and you're not really learning anything. You're able to sort of pass the test, perhaps, but you're not learning anything as part of that process. And that's really where we have to get back to the ideas of what is learning and how do we assess that. And this is a little table. Again, I showed you all those people who helped me with this at the beginning of the presentation here, but this is some sort of summary of research. And we look at effects on cognition. So this is, are you actually learning the content? And then effects on affective learning. So this is about your attitudes about learning. So are you enjoying your learning? Do you feel like you're empowered? Do you want to continue? Are you motivated by this? So we think about both of these things as in learning sciences really being equally important. It's not about just what you learn, but about how you feel about it, because that's going to enable you to continue on in your studies. And what this table shows is that the research in large language models and education shows that it's equivocal at this point. It can have positive effects on cognition. It can have negative effects on cognition. It can have positive effects on affective learning. It can have negative effects on affective learning. And at this point, we don't really know like why. Like, is it the subject matter? Is it the students? Is it the course? Is it the particular model that we're using? We're starting to learn some things about this, but at this point, it's not clear that sort of using a large language model, it could help. It could also harm. I'll just point out a couple of things here. This is one of the ones that we list this as positive, but we debate this. Some meta-analysis of the work show that using ChatGPT could make the learning less cognitively demanding. And in some cases, that's good. We could look at that as positive. Sometimes we're doing a lot of things, and maybe ChatGPT is helping us with the things that are less important, and that would actually be positive that it was less cognitively demanding. But as I said, having some difficulty in your learning is actually really good. So actually making it less cognitively demanding could be a bad thing as well. If it's sort of making it too easy for you, where you're sort of not having to think about it enough, it could actually be bad. Another one here, it's a risk of deteriorating our ability to effectively learn some of the required skills. When we offload everything to ChatGPT, we're really just sort of offloading our learning to something else, and we're not learning the processes ourselves. This is a study that came out from Anthropic. They make the Claude series of models, large language models. And they looked at, they'd given access to these models to a lot of college students, and they did some analysis. I think this was actually based on student responses, they didn't actually have data. They did surveys afterwards. They asked students how they use the tools. They defined this as both direct help and collaborative help. So direct help is where a student just says, solve the problem for me. I just want the answer. And collaborative help is where they're like, I want to learn something. I want to learn it along with you. And I just want you to support me in my learning. And nearly half of the things that students report, and so this is, I think, actually probably understated, they report that nearly half of what they do is just asking for the answers. They don't care about learning. They're not looking for their support and their guidance. They're just looking for the answers. And that really is a sort of a fundamental challenge in college education. Many of you may have seen that there was a New Yorker article that basically said like college is over because all students are just sort of asking for answers on ChatGPT now. And that is a problem I think that we face. And this is not just a technical problem. It's about sort of trying to teach students what's valuable in learning and what don't you want to shortcut. One question is, how do we support good pedagogical practices? As I said, like a lot of the AI tutors, they think about this is good pedagogy. Kids should be sitting at computers and learning things. But that's not what we think about. This really, we think about kids like learning together, working on projects, working on complex problems, having to figure out roles on teams. That's what really good pedagogy and good learning looks like. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but there's emerging research, including some of ours, on how to use AI in collaboration, which is one of our special interests. We have something called CALE, Collaborative Artificial Intelligence for Learning, which is an AI bot that sits on a phone. And that phone sits on a table in a group. So you have 4 or 5 kids working together on a project, and the AI agent listens in, and its goal is to sort of help the students work together. So it's not about giving the students answers, but about figuring out ways that the students can work together and the ways that it can help them support them in that. Another thing we're interested in is AI to support reflection. On the left is a game called Quandary, which is a game made by the Learning Games Network, which is another nonprofit that we spun out of MIT, which makes learning games. And this is about ethical decision making, this game. And it won an award to integrate AI into it. And on the right is a game that I'm making for mathematics, early algebra. And they both, the idea is that we want to integrate reflection into the games. And so part of what you do in the game is work with an AI agent to reflect on what you're doing and get feedback on what you're doing inside the game. We think about what's the role of AI in supporting personal and professional futures. AI literacy is an immediate national and global need at this point. We really need to be teaching all kids about AI literacy. It's about how to create things with AI, work with AI, and understanding its drawbacks and its possibilities. As I mentioned, this is some of our frameworks here. I won't go into that again. This is a really important one. And a lot of people hear about this, the idea of the Turing trap. It's not that people will be replaced by AI, but we think that people who know AI will replace people who don't know AI. So if you want to succeed in the workplace, it's about knowing how you can work with AI. And we think that's going to be critical for all people to succeed in the workplace, regardless of whether you're doing sort of a manufacturing job or an engineering job, or really most tasks that we see people doing today, auto mechanics, etc. AI literacy is not an extension of computer science. We think about it as something that's independent. Right now, there's really just an emerging set of standards within the United States on this. California is the only state so far that's passed legislation on this. Several states have bills that have introduced AI literacy into the curriculum standards. Massachusetts is working on some of this. I don't know if any bills have been introduced yet, but I know that the education department is working on some of these things. This is some of the stuff that we've done. Learning and student growth is an important part of it. We have one program called Daily, which is really supporting about student growth in these spaces. It's related to another project called the Everyday AI Teacher Education Program. This is to give you an idea of what we do for teachers. So we have a process called Train the Trainer. So the idea is we want to train teachers who can help support other teachers. And what they do then is they have book clubs, they have practicums, they help teachers with implementation. And we think this is something that's really important to figure out how to scale this quickly. And unlike, we think about, and I'll get back to this a little bit later, unlike we think about, when teachers had to learn things about the internet, it was like they learned things about the internet once, and they were probably good for about a decade. The internet didn't change that much over the course of a decade. When we think about AI, this is something that's going to need to happen every year. Teachers are going to need to have constant professional development to understand how they're learning about and using about AI. Part of that comes with assessment. These are two of the things we're working on. One is at the middle school level, one at the high school level, thinking about the kinds of things we want to be able to know whether students know, AI general concepts, things about machine learning, supervised learning. So we're developing frameworks right now and tools to help us assess those things. What are current policies and practices and how they inform the future? As I mentioned, there's only a few states that have things on AI literacy. More states have things that address the way that AI should be used in schools and have sort of policies around it. Things like plagiarism and data privacy. Right now, about half the states do have policies on some of those things. Some states have provided guidance for local schools, as you may know. Like the way that schools are governed in the United States is a little unusual. Almost all of it is local control. So school districts have local control. States have some influence on that. The federal government has some influence on the states. So it's something that really gets distributed in different kinds of ways. I'm an advocate for local control. I think there's some advantage to that. But I think in something like this in AI, like I think if you push this down to schools, like there's no way that schools can deal with this. This is too hard, too complex, too fast moving for schools to do this on an individual basis. And I really think we either need, states or even the federal government to think about either maybe perhaps flexible frameworks that help schools think about how they can adapt to this. So I do think that that second point here, the federal government needs to play a role in coordinating educational guidance. At this point, the Department of Education is probably not funding anything anymore. There was an executive order, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that was about AI literacy in schools, and it did advocate for the NSF to provide additional funding in AI literacy, and I hope that one actually amounts to something. So that's a place where maybe an executive order will help some of these educational initiatives. And needs to support educators and supporting students. This is an idea I've come back to several times in this talk. It's not about sort of replacing teachers with AI. It's about figuring out ways we can support teachers to support students using AI. Think about the collaborative learning one that I mentioned. It's not about replacing the teacher in that room. It's a matter of saying teachers can't monitor 10 groups of 4 students working at the same time, but they can walk around the room, and if there's something that's supporting each group, that it makes it a much more possible process. Some of this is also just about ways that it can support teachers directly without supporting the teachers, without supporting the students. Differentiated instruction is an important one that people come back to a lot. How are ways that teachers can create versions of activities that sort of appeal or at the levels of different students in their classes? A lot of teachers are thinking about ways that AI can be used to do things like that. On the right here is my colleague Justin Reich's Teacher Moments platform, which is a platform where teachers can run through simulations of teaching, and then that's also supported by AI. Educators need to be part of the AI conversation, and in too many cases, we think about policymakers and even academics making decisions about AI, and we really need to make sure that teachers are part of that conversation. I mentioned that teachers need to stay up to date. This is something that is, again, it's not something that happens yearly, not decade-wise, but really needs to happen on a yearly basis. This is a course that we created with Google about generative AI for educators. It's about like a 2 or 3 hour course. And our idea is to think about ways we might update this so teachers are taking some version of this or something like this every year. When you think about the digital divide, the digital divide has gone through many generations, and these are not these are additive. These don't replace them. The third digital divide does not replace the first one. The first one is about those who have access to the digital tools. So whether you have computer or internet, there are still places without computers and internet. The second digital divide was those who know how to use the tools and those who don't know how to use the tools. And the third one is really about the digital divide between the places that will have humans and AI working together and the ones that will replace humans with AI. And that's going to create another divide that we see coming up. The cost will be a part of that. As we think about AI, at this point, some companies are providing it for free, but this is not going to go on forever. The cost of this is real, both in terms of dollars and energy. And when you think about ways that we're going to be able to provide this at scalable costs for schools. So I'll conclude just saying the future is bright if we plan the right route. I think there's lots of great things that kids can do with AI. I mentioned briefly we run this program called Future Makers, which is this program for helping middle, high school, and college students create apps that have social impact. I was just a few weeks ago at the ASU GSV big show. We were presenting some of the winners with this, and students were doing things like creating apps for early stroke onset detection. A middle school group made an app that helped people with mobility impairments provide maps of accessible places in New York City where they could go. I mean, they're really doing wonderful things with these kinds of technologies. And I think if we can push students into the right ways, I think they'll make fabulous impacts in the future. I think that. Oh no, sorry. This is just some of the stuff. I'll run through it quickly. This is Justin. I mentioned early on, or this is his flyer on guidance for teachers. This is a paper that we wrote about a year ago, which is about generative AI and K-12 and MIT perspective. So thinking about ways that AI will play an impact in education. This is our policy paper, which is now out of date, which calls on Department of Education and NIST and things like that to do things. We're going to probably update this paper. It's less than a year old, as I said, but it's out of date now. We'll probably update it sort of with the new framework for the federal government to think about ways we can adapt these to the current environment. With that, I'll say thank you, and I have a few minutes for questions.
Eric, I want to thank you. This is an impressive demonstration of what MIT is actively involved with, and I guess I really didn't have an appreciation for just how incorporating it is. But I want to I do have a question. I'm sure there are going to be some others, but I want to start with one observation, I guess I should say. the slide you showed of cats and dogs makes a tremendously important point. I mean, we're talking about generative pre-trained transform, GPT, and it's all about the input. So if you show, I think I understood correctly, you showed a slide which dogs are only red in color and cats
Yep.
are black and white.
Yep.
And if you saw a black and white animal, you would assume it was definitely not a dog.
Yep.
Now, that leads me to conclude that somewhere along the line, we have to incorporate and make certain that critical thinking is part of the whole process. Because someone could be totally confused. And it's broader than that too. You know, if a bot, if a machine like chat is trained on misinformation, and that finds its way into the general public discourse on a moderate matter of policy.
Yep.
That can be tremendously damaging unless there are people who are thinking critically about the outcomes. So I basically, I guess I have two questions. Is there some way to train bots to look for truthful information and to discard known uh, lies or mistruths? And secondly, how do you incorporate critical thinking, not only into kids, but into the general public? How do you do that?
Yeah. So the first question is more challenging because what truth is
Yeah.
is under assault, under debate.
Yeah.
Depending on your perspective, you can think about it different ways. So yes, you can absolutely try to train these sort of systems on things that you think are true, and you can also you can train them on here are things that are false, and like these are things you should identify as being false.
Right.
So you can do that. Um, um, you know, they're not perfect though. I don't think the systems will ever be perfect. And so that relates to your second question. So even if you can do that, so first of all, uh, a lot of systems had done that, and now they're being called out for being biased by people who see some of that truth being being debatable.
Yeah.
So there's people who call that out. So a lot of those kind of systems are under assault. But it's really the second point I think is ultimately more important. It's really about critical thinking. I need to know that when I get something back, I need to have the tools to understand to verify that. So when I get an answer back, I don't just copy and paste that somewhere, but I think about it. I verify it with sources that I know. I talk to other people who I trust about this. I have to think about I can use ChatGPT as part of this, but I have to use it as one tool amongst many to triangulate the value of that information. And so that's the most important thing. The most important thing is teaching kids that it's not just about getting the answer out. This is, to a lesser extent, this happened with calculators, and some people debate this. I do make a lot of analogies between the introduction of calculators into mathematics courses, several decades ago, to the way we see
Yeah.
ChatGPT today. And there's plenty of examples where kids type numbers into calculators, an answer comes out, and they're like, "Okay, the answer's four." And you're like, "Well, that's the number of miles between the Earth and the Moon is four. Like, would that make sense?"
Yeah. That's
Like
exactly.
so,
That's
yeah,
critical
yeah.
thinking.
You
Right.
have to have critical thinking in that. You can't just sort of trust the answers that come out. And I think ChatGPT is the same way. I can't just trust the answers that come out. Now, some of them are now starting to have links. So, like when it gives you an answer, there's links to things that I can verify. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Sometimes those links are actually incorrect themselves. But you have to click on them too. Like you can't just like trust it because there's a link that it's more valuable. So it's really about teaching kids the skills that they need to be able to follow through on that and be able to do that critical thinking. That's the most important thing.
Well, just one final comment. Now we have a lot of hands up, so I want to get to everybody. But you know what, as scientists or engineers or medical practitioners, we have to depend on training with truthful information. I mean, you wouldn't trust a medical diagnostic or diagnosis unless you thought it had verifiable and truthful information supporting it. And training the AI, AI has been very useful in science, engineering, and medicine. It's demonstrably useful, but it works on the truth. And on the other hand, we have this tremendous divide between science and engineering, medicine, and social interactions, where I think it's often trained on mistruths. And that's where I think there's a huge ethical divide between science, engineering, medicine on the one hand, and the involvement, the ethical decisions made by, let's say, big tech in the way that AI is rolled out to the public and in terms of general discourse. But that's just my opinion. Anyway,
Yep.
let's go on. We have some other hands up. Let's go to Jenny. She's up first.
Well, Eric, thank you and congratulations. Your program you reported has benefited 670 students across the globe. I have a twofold question regarding that. Uh, among the students across different countries and even different grades in school, I wonder what's your observation in terms of a learning mindset, learning efficiency, any other characteristic of learning you have observed among the the group of or even geographic or country-wise of a type of students. And also related to that, about your large language model you've been using, do you see, do you actually post-train some of the commercial available model to further tailor to the specific age of student? Of course, it's a K to 12, and even probably in the college as well. Students are say AI assistant. Do you do the post training to kind of customize in the subdomain or domain type of different domains of subdomains of the model to make it a little even more precise and more targeted, or if you think there's a need for that?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. So we don't do fine tuning of models. It's really expensive to do. So we don't do much of that in our own work. A lot of the I don't know how much you all know about large language models, but there's something called the context window, which is basically how much memory the model can know about. And those have been increasing dramatically over the last couple year, I'd say. And so most of the work that we do is providing context within that large context window. So it can be about like, I'm going to provide the mathematics textbook is going to go in that context window. So when a student asks a question, it knows everything about the context of the textbook that they've been reading along with that. So what we try to do is provide additional context in that context window with it. There are companies working on, and we work with Google among other companies. Google has a model called LearnLM, which is a version of their Gemini that's specifically tuned for K-12 schools and to some extent higher education. And so I showed you the math game that we're working on, and in that one, for example, we use LearnLM as the model that we have behind that. So that's specifically tuned for a younger audience. It's got sort of pedagogical guidance in it. And so it's a better model for us, and we're hopeful that Google will continue to tune that. We talked to the LearnLM team recently as well, so that should continue to advance. We'd rather not, I think we could invest in trying to sort of fine tune some models, but I think I'm going to leave that up to the big tech companies to invest the big dollars in doing that at a large scale. And we found so far that with that increase in context windows that we can put a lot of stuff in there, and those can be really much more accurate as a result of that. In terms of those sort of pedagogical sort of frameworks that different schools are using, it's really literally all over the map. We try to sort of design our lessons to be constructivist, constructionist. So it's much more about sort of empowering students to create things, share things, learn from sort of first principles. There are certainly cases where schools adapt that to fit their own sort of pedagogical frameworks, which are more teacher centered. But we try to sort of have, it's often people call it the Trojan mouse, the idea that like we can through our, while this is nominally about technology, we also think that it can help change the pedagogy along the way. It can make it more student centered, and so we do try to think about that. And a lot of what we do is provide teacher training. So it's not just about providing materials, but we provide teacher training, and that teacher training is really about how do you make this much more hands-on. But it's as we do this in more and more countries all over the world, we can't necessarily flip those schools 180 degrees in their pedagogy overnight, and so we hope that we can at least sort of start turning that ship a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Neil, you're muted, Neil. There you go.
Wanted to just to mention that I listened to Buffett speak. I listened to the whole presentation, and and that was basically what I wanted to say. But I also wanted to say, well, I this is outside my competence, this particular talk. So I've read about it, but I haven't done anything with it. So I find it very interesting to hear what I don't know. Thank you.
It's a learning process, right?
Yeah.
There you go. Vince Dixon. Vince, we can't see you or hear you.
Hear me now.
There you go.
Okay, Ron. As you know, a little further down the road, we're going to be talking about the history of industrial revolutions, and this is surely revolutionary. Two thoughts here and one question. One is I didn't hear much about the actual construct that has been developed in Western civilization, which is different approaches to what the philosophy of education is, because this is an interesting kind of intersection between learning just in an application sort of way. So students are learning stuff, but there is a kind of a lack of reference to what the purpose of education is. And that's where one of the problems comes up, whether the federal government is in fact simply dissenting or walking away from any of this. And perhaps that's okay if we remember the self-governing aspect of it. The purpose of education has to be partly about basic knowledge, and that's where the purpose of AI comes in. What are the guardrails? And if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, machines were invented and created, looms and mechanized development. But then, of course, people lost fingers and arms. They were made to work lots of hours. And unfortunately, those who care about responsibility had to catch up. And so I think we kind of need here to recognize the brilliance of MIT in the application aspect, but how do we intersect the somewhat more subjective values, not just of truth, but the purposes of education in a broader way?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a different talk about the purpose of education. That's what we cover that in my class. And in fact, the at least in the United States, cover it in the United States. The purpose of education has actually changed over the times in the United States. And we may sort of be at another transition. And I think right now, I think that's actually not being influenced by AI. It probably should be influenced by AI. In many places, there's sort of a movement to like get back to basics. Like we just want kids to sort of understand sort of the basics of math or the basics of literacy. And not that those things aren't important. But if kids just know the basics of math, and they're going to learn it like I learned it, they're not going to be prepared for the world of today. And those are the things that are most easily replaced by AI. So things that are sort of pretty, or even just sort of computers. You don't actually need AI to do a lot of those things. And so I think this is a chance for us to actually have to rethink. It's causing people to rethink what the purpose of society and governments and supporting of people is. Is this going to displace jobs, et cetera. But I definitely think we need to be rethinking about what education is. And I think it is going to be much more about these sort of critical thinking sets of skills that Ron was talking about. It's going to be about thinking about its creativity. It's going to be thinking about all the things that we need to do that are sort of unique to humans, and they're special to us, that we can really draw upon both in our personal lives and our professional lives. And so I think it's time for another conversation about that.
That's well stated. Part of that is also not forgetting that human contact, because we found actually that tutors often have much greater effect, not because of what they're teaching by itself, but the human being who's interested in the individual student.
Yep.
I have an education background, as many know, and there's somebody who asked me, well, what about his kid who was struggling with a public school? And we arrived at a solution where he liked the socialization and what he was learning in the school, but his father was so good at math that he sat down and worked with him as a tutor at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the young fellow prospered because it was his father's personal connection that was a good one, fortunately, that said to the child, this is interesting because my father is interested, and he learned as much from his father's tutoring for an hour or two in the afternoon than from 6 hours of social emotional learning. And it's doing both. Ultimately, I think probably we look at AI as a tool for humans rather than as a replacement, and that's going to be a guardrail. And perhaps the new Pope might touch on that because he specifically talked about Leo the 13th, the status of human beings in sophisticated industrial society. And that's an interesting challenge from a different quarter that I don't think people expected.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to Eddie. Thanks, Vince.
Yeah, hi, Eric. Very interesting talk. And in a sense, Vincent has touched on what I was going to ask, which is this sense of that you're losing the human in the technology. And that to me is enormously concerning. Right now, I have a granddaughter who loves to use the idea of AI as a way of, doing her homework, if you will, and not really learning, which is really a challenge to any parent. And a thought occurred to me, which is quite simple, which is that instead of getting AI to write your essay, how about having AI write the essay and then the kid having to actually comment on it and write it down by hand? The actual mechanical action of writing things down by hand at least gives them some a chance to actually think about what they're doing, and that's what I mean about sort of losing the human in the technology and trying to bring the human back in. So my question really is centered around, and perhaps there isn't any research on this, but looking at classical ways of teaching and the effects it has on the child in terms of their interest in learning, and their actual ability to learn, and their actual ability to continue to learn, and to spend time because they'll find an interest in doing that learning. So I think you touched on it, but how would you say this means of learning is comparative, comparable to past methods?
Yeah, I mean, so I absolutely think we need to learn. We need to draw on what we know about the way that kids learn effectively, the way that they learn with their peers, the way they learn with motivation and sort of setting out problems. I think the challenge that we face is, I think particularly as you get to sort of older kids, like we need to recognize that even though we might say, oh yeah, we really want the students to be, we're going to value sort of classical writing methods, but if they go home and they type the thing into ChatGPT and come in the next day and they sort of just copy it from the thing they wrote in ChatGPT, that's not going to be helpful. So we need to think about ways we can sort of draw on the lessons of what we know about the way that kids learn and are motivated and develop socially and intellectually, and apply that sort of in a new context with these new tools that we know are around. I think some of that is going to be about teaching kids how to effectively use them. And I think that, people talk about this with social media, like we just kind of ignored it in schools. Like social media, we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. We're going to tell kids not to use it, but we're not going to teach kids about how to like be ethical and to pursue their well-being using these tools. We're going to just sort of pretend they don't exist. And we know what happened there. Social media has become a terrible problem for teens at this point, and now schools are banning phones within schools, which is, I don't know if that's the best solution. They think it sort of pushes the problem outside of school at least, but it doesn't sort of fix the problem. It just sort of like pushes it outside of school. But I think we can't do that with AI. Schools are going to need to sort of take responsibility and say, like, we're going to need to teach kids how to use this tool and help them understand how to use it effectively for their own learning, and not to just sort of bypass learning, which is what
Yeah.
kids will do by default.
I guess what my part of my question is, can we mix and find a good balance between what was old and what is new so
I
that
think
we
so.
don't lose the kid in the technology?
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. We don't want this to. This should not be about AI all the time. There's lots of things. If you saw the picture, it was an AI generated picture, but of kids sitting around a table, like working together. I want that there should be a lot more of that, where kids are sort of working together, working on problems. But the fact is that you know a lot of schools still were sort of the classical methods where a teacher's sitting up at the front of the room and talking to the students. And I think at some point people will realize that that's not a great pedagogy to begin with, and we need to think about ways that maybe both better pedagogy and technology can play a role in improving that.
Just one quick comment. At my granddaughter's school, they actually mix grades. So the kids from the upper grade help teach the younger grades. And
Uh-huh.
I think that's quite an interesting idea.
Is
Anyway,
that a Montessori school?
it's sort of, yeah, it's in Quebec, and
Okay.
I
Okay.
couldn't really tell you exactly what kind of
Okay.
school it is.
Thanks, Eddie. Let's go on to Albert.
Yeah, hi, Eric. I have a question and a thought. The question is on that test you ran with three groups with Python and Fortran, etc. I missed the results of your test. Maybe it was cut up so I couldn't hear what you said. Can you tell us what came out of the test?
Yeah. So real quickly, so the three different groups, they were given a problem. They were given during the first round of the problem, they were allowed to use those tools. During the second round of the problem, it was closed book, so they had to do it all from memory, but they had a similar problem that they had to solve. And the punchline is that the better the AI help, the worse they did on the test when they had no AI available to them, or no technology available to them. So when they had to solve the problem by hand, when they no longer had the tools, the better the AI tool that they used in learning, the worse they did on the actual exam afterwards. So essentially the more they struggled, the less AI help they had, the better they did on the test afterwards.
Very interesting. Now here's my thought, and I'm not in the AI at all, but I understand that fundamentally there's statistics behind all of these manipulation of data. So my question is, would it make sense to uh, come up with not just the result, but maybe the accuracy of the results in a quantitative way? Like, for example, in your case where you had dogs and cats, etc. So the answer comes up, uh, it is a dog with 1 out of 4% accuracy or 25% accuracy or something. Is that doable given the breadth of what you folks are doing with AI? And is anybody doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that people sort of look at the accuracy of these models, and so there's benchmarks that people use to sort of benchmark models to say how accurate they are. There's ways of using, it's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is the idea is like the models can continue to learn and be trained by getting human feedback. So if I can tell it like you said it was a dog, but it's actually a cat. You can sort of teach some models that they're getting it wrong and they can improve over time. And that's something that we're actually thinking about. There's a student one of Cynthia Brazil's students, who's working on reinforcement learning for human feedback for tutors, with the idea that sometimes I talked about this sort of as a dichotomy, like, are you asking for like a direct answer? Are you asking for help in learning? If you always sort of default to trying to give help in learning, students may give up and say, this tutor is so frustrating. They never give me the answer. On the other hand, if you always give the answer, they're not going to learn anything. And the idea is, can we train models to be able to recognize when they should be sort of giving a more direct answer to students and when they should be giving them sort of more hints and help, and to keep them engaged? And the answer seems to be like, probably we can do that. So that's a case where we actually can train a model with some of that human feedback how to behave better, when it's working with humans.
No, I understand that the model can improve, just like you said, very nice. My question is whether every time an answer comes out, there will be a probability number on its accuracy
I see.
that is calculated every time, and that could give you more confidence or less.
Yeah, I have seen systems like that. I don't know too much about that, about how they generate those numbers, but I have seen ones that sort of give some sort of confidence in their answer. So like, this is how confident I am in the answer. And I don't know how those are generated. It's not enough an area I know enough about.
So it's doable, basically.
I think I think in some domains I think it is.
That's an interesting question. I just wonder if it is in the interest of big tech to actually try to
Yeah.
It may not be, given the way they function, but that's another issue. Let's go on to the other questions here. Let's go to
I need to go in just about 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
thanks, Eric. Tom?
Yeah, Eric, this is a great presentation. You know, now I'm sort of seeing 4 generations of people being educated, including my parents. This is, a great thing to see. But I was struck by one thing that you actually had on one of your slides. You said that AI won't replace people. It's people who know AI will replace people. And so when I was thinking about this, in lieu of with your list of countries that now are starting to use your resources, are we seeing essentially a difference between the number of foreign countries that are now trying to increase their AI literacy compared to the US? Is it sort of for whatever reason we're going to be on the back end of AI literacy, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have. I'd be lying if I said I had really good data on this, but I have some intuition from some experience. My intuition from experience is that yes, we are not taking this seriously enough, and other countries see this as an opportunity that maybe either they've fallen behind or they're just not they haven't been as competitive, and this is an opportunity to like leapfrog other countries, including the United States. I think it's a significant risk. I mentioned the idea of sort of local control earlier. The fact that it's very hard to sort of mobilize something at a national scale in education in the United States makes it even more difficult for that to happen. So it may be that not everybody in the United States, like there's probably some districts in the United States that are taking this really seriously and moving ahead. But at a national level, we don't have the ability to move as quickly as other countries that that for better or worse have more sort of centralized authority in education, and more of a mission for this. The United States does not see this as at this point at least has not expressed the desire to sort of move quickly in this area.
All right, thank you.
Eric, before we move on, we have 4 more hands up, and what is your time constraint? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I do. I have another meeting at noon, and I need to eat lunch in between. And that meeting is a long meeting, so I need to end by 5 of.
Okay, let's go to Tom.
I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
I've taught the same philosophy course in the University of the West Indies Theological Department and in the college where I studied in the 1960s. And in Jamaica, people really wanted to gain skills. That was important to them. In North America, they couldn't care less about skills. They just wanted the credit to get through it, to get done with it. My whole college education was filling myself with approved facts, things said to be facts. Giant survey courses all through gave me a sense that I'd been educated about 1 inch deep and miles wide. Critical thinking was much talked about, but it wasn't pursued. I have the same fear now that critical thinking is, and making people work and suffering in their education. We can talk about it, but I wish you well with it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that we talked about sort of the role of what's the role of education in the United States, and I think that goes throughout. It goes into higher education as well, and we need to sort of turn that around. We need to think about what people value, and it is people need to value critical thinking. And in fact, in many cases, there's states in the United States now where critical thinking is not allowed in schools. And this is the opposite of the direction we should be headed right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it could be more important. We have three more hands, but let's quickly go to, thanks, Tom. Let's go to Bob. You're muted, Bob.
A practical question, Eric. Could you provide, is there a link so that those of us on the outside, including those who are in education, could see the work of your program, could follow what you're doing, including publications and links to particularly what's in the RAISE program?
Yep, I'm putting in the chat here. It's raise.mit.edu. Is the main one. I accidentally sent that only to one person. Now I just sent it to everybody. And you can also, my own program is education.mit.edu.
If you could send those to me, I'll circulate them by,
Yep.
through to everyone in our crew. So just
Yep.
send. Thanks, Bob. Bob Zimmerman.
Yes, excellent presentation. Very much enjoyed. I was an undergraduate at MIT in computer science and EE back in the class of '69. I just gave a presentation to my high school on AI and my career in science at NASA. But one of the things I wanted to add is regarding the question of could you give it a score? I don't think a single number score is particularly helpful. Thinking about trying to put it in some sort of three space, which might have something about the performance, utility, ease of learning. So as to look at a more complicated, I'd need to think about what the dimensions are more, as I think we all would. But a single number is probably not the way to approach this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we also, this matter of like, well, then do people place too much value on that single number also? And what does it mean to have a 75% chance of being right? Like there's like how do I interpret? I think people often don't have the mathematical skills to sort of interpret what that would mean.
All right, Ed, we have about 1 minute, Ed. Then we got to let this guy go and get some lunch. Okay, Ed.
My first sentence is I use AI to interpret radar images for weather interpretation. My question is very simple. I'm a totalitarian government. I want to train the model on a history that I have created to educate my people. I think it would work. I think you could edit history in a way that and feed that information into AI, and
Yes,
you would learn about truth.
Yeah.
That's I mean, as much as Ron asked earlier, can you train it to identify misinformation? You can also train it to portray misinformation if that's what you want to do. That's been the case. I mean, the way that China has treated the internet is not any secret. When you go there, like you can't find certain information on the internet. You can't find anything about Tiananmen Square. It's not accessible from China. So this sort of censorship and sort of rewriting of history is not exclusive to AI. It pervaded the internet era as well. But certainly, I mean, it's one thing that people have raised about DeepSeek, which is the sort of the miracle Chinese large language model, is that it has two levels of training in it, as my understanding. One is the model itself has training that's trained on data sets that don't include things about, for example, Tiananmen Square. The second is that when you run it off of their systems, there are filters that make sure that you're not asking questions about Tiananmen Square. So there's certainly issues in who controls us. I do think, for that matter, you talked about authoritarian governments. I don't necessarily want big tech to control like what it thinks is truth. So I think we need to think about that as well.
Eric, I think we need to let you go.
Yes, you need to let me go. I need to run quickly.
Thank you. I want to thank you for joining us. I think bottom line from my perspective is is that AI can be supremely useful, but it can also be supremely dangerous.
Yep.
And it's all about how you use it,
Yep.
Frank. And that's the input, part of the input in the equation. And anyway,
Great. It was wonderful talking with you all.
yeah, thanks, Eric. Take care.
Thank you, Eric.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Very good.